seem like it's a big dangerous thing, and when they do a little infographic on it, what kind of music do they use? Reggae, man. So this is Newsweek magazine talking about cannabis. Says though use has been legal for Canadians since 2001, the Cannabis Act will allow the sale and consumption of recreational marijuana starting in October. Actually, Newsweek said September, but they were wrong. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised to legalize weed during his 2015 campaign. And he tweeted his support for the Cannabis Act after it passed the Senate. And he said, it's been too easy for our kids to get marijuana. He's still saying it, this putz. And for criminals to reap the profits. Well, it sounds like he is interested in doing that. It's because that's exactly what they're doing. It is too easy for your kids to get marijuana. Not as easy as it is to get sugar. So that's another pack of lies. And the Canadian medical folks that don't want to have this because of a lack of clinical research, if you don't do the research, you don't have the clinical research. What's the matter with you people? Unbelievable to me. And we're going to get into a few other topics as well, and we're going to do it with our guest once he comes into the studio, which will be pretty soon, I can imagine. He's right outside. I do want to mention that as much as they want to put everybody away, courts have ruled that medical cannabis users cannot be charged with driving under the influence. What? That sounds like a complete contradiction of everything you were just saying. Yes, the Arizona Court of Appeals has ruled that the state's medical cannabis patients who have been charged with DUI may contest the charges against them. And that's exactly what's going to happen in Canada. And they're going to be so filled with court cases. I would like to make a prediction a little more solid. I've kind of danced around it over the past few weeks, but I think that between our legalization in mid-late October and the spring break, when the kids want to go down to Florida and have fun in the sun, they're probably going to be in a courtroom somewhere defending the fact that they tested positive for having cannabis in their system and are now fighting that system, trying to prove that they weren't high, they weren't impaired, they just had cannabis in their system. But Canada seems to be running with this faulty and false presence. And speaking of presence, we now have Brian O'Day in the room. Let me just shake your hand, sir. Thank you so much for coming in. This gentleman is the Potfather. Okay, that's his nickname. And the reason is Brian, as I said at the beginning of the show, a long time ago got himself involved in cannabis, or did you call it marijuana back then? Smuggling, and his big problem was that it's real difficult to get away with 75 tons of that stuff under your charge, and Brian, unfortunately for himself and his friends and family, did some time, and he's here to tell us about everything that led up to that and his life afterwards, which is completely different. So please welcome Brian O'Day to the show.
Hey, thank you.
Such a thrill. I saw Brian at the Karma Cup a couple of weeks ago and asked him to come on, and here he is. So good sir, you've lived a heck of a life, and you look like you got a lot more time on you.
Yeah, well, so I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that that you're here. This is another Canadian, of course, and Brian, can we just start out a little bit early on in your career, and let's go. I guess you call it a career.
It was.
However you started or got the idea. I mean, was it in the 70s? Were you smoking a joint, thinking, "Gee whiz, I'd like more of this"? How did it all get going? You couldn't have imagined one day you'd go down with 75 tons.
No, it was actually in the 60s, and it started just simply smoking a joint, and I got high, I liked it, and I had to figure out how to get more. And how I was able to afford it eventually, you know, I blew through my tuition and rent money and food money, and then I got some fronted to me and cut it up into nickels and dimes and sold it.
And what did that mean back then? Nickel was like $5 worth of pot?
Nickel was like a little matchbox, a little wooden matchbox filled with pot. And it was $5 worth of pot. Yeah.
And the dimes were $10 for twice that.
Yes.
Etc.
Right. And then from there, I quickly realized that, you know, I'm from Newfoundland, and I used to go up to the mainland to buy the products that I would bring back to Newfoundland. And Newfoundlanders in those days weren't treated with the respect that they seem to command today. And we were the brunt of jokes, and we were abused by mainlanders frequently. And so we were, we paid more for the product coming to Toronto or Montreal to get it than people who lived here. I met a guy from England, and he said, I'll introduce you to some friends of mine in England, and he did, and that's when it went from a Canadian trip to an international trip. And I started smuggling hash from England.
Oh, you started smuggling from England. That was your first smuggle?
Yeah, that was my first border smuggle.
Now, this is a long time ago, of course, and everything in the world will be different. And so I'm going to ask, how did you smuggle it? I mean, you could have just walked right on the plane and sat down back in those days. Different security, yeah.
No security.
No, you just give them your suitcase and go get your seat, right? That's all.
Yeah, and, I had the hash strapped to my body, so that was it.
How much hash would you carry on your body? Like
10 pounds.
10 pounds?
Was the first one.
And they're little equal distributed packets around your torso, etc. Yeah. So when you saw the movie Midnight Express, and Billy is...
I never saw that movie.
You never saw that movie?
No.
Oh, wow. There's a scene in there where...
Intentionally.
Okay, yeah. He's taped up with hash, as you describe, and they get on the plane, and the whole time he's just dun, 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 dun. You hear his heart beating like crazy, and the sweat's coming down, and he's on the plane, and they're starting to go, and he's like, oh, good. But then the plane stops and the guys come on and they take them off and the movie starts.
Right.
It's quite the...
I had similar things like that happen to me in Colombia when I was, I first got out of prison in 72. I went to prison in 72 for pot. And then when I get out, I was trying to get a steak. So I smuggled a little bit of coke. And the evil substance, for sure. That thing took my life. And,
cocaine.
Yeah, it was an awful substance. Anyway, for a while I was involved with it, and twice leaving Colombia I got pulled in by their cops, but managed to...
At the airport?
At the airport, yeah.
Wow. What, did they go through your stuff and find it?
Strip me naked, everything. The first time I held the coke in my hand, and the second time it was in a false bottom of a suitcase, which when they were searching, I held the bottom that had the coke in it so they wouldn't notice how heavy it was, and just threw the clothes out and said, see, and they shook the suitcase out.
And they didn't find it?
No, they didn't find it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was, I was lucky.
And you lost 12 pounds of sweat once you took your seat on the plane?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. So, cocaine. So let's take a little jaunt down there for a second. I've done it. Anybody my age probably has considered doing it, if not done it. I did it in the 80s. Everybody was doing it, man.
That was when it was fun, it seemed.
Yeah.
And
what happened?
God, it was like it changed universally. The vibration of it changed. It went from being fun to being an isolator. It went from we'd go out every night and play and, stay up all night and sleep the next day and go back and do it again and just have fun. And at a certain point in the 70s, something happened to that substance, and it became a real problem for everybody that I knew was doing it.
And this is all pre-crack, by the way. This is all pre-crack days, right? I mean, it was already nuts.
Well, crack was kind of happening then. There was a thing called base then, basura, which is, when you're involved in the coke business, when you get your original form of cocaine from the people who are processing it, you get a thing called base, and then you turn it into cocaine. The base is the same as crack, basically.
Okay, you're right.
But it's pre it being made into coke. Most of the crack is coke that's turned back into base. So it was around then. I never liked it then, and thank God I never liked it ever. Friends of mine around me did, and ended up in trouble with it. I didn't like it. And then, when I stopped liking coke, it took me about 5 years to stop doing it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre.
So were you hating yourself with every line you snorted kind of thing, or?
Sort of. Coke was the only time I enjoyed coke in kind of the last 4 or 5 years I did it was the anticipation of doing it.
Oh, right.
The moment I did the action and actually did it, it was all downhill from there until, 3
right
or 4
up to the
days
first
later.
line there, it's good. And then
something good, and then it just turned into a nightmare, and it never got better.
Well, I'm so lucky because I did the same thing. I tried it a few times. I went to some parties. There was a place nearby downtown. I took it maybe, 8 or 10 times, snorting it. And then it got to the point where someone introduced crack. It was on the news. The police were lamenting its arrival. And I did try some, and we somehow or other, I don't know how this happened, but we smoked it off the top of a pop tin or a beer can or something.
Right.
And someone had done that, and I did that. I found it horrendous, metallic, and terrible, and then it made me feel like shit, and then people started getting hooked on it left, right, center. I couldn't believe it.
It's hard to believe, huh?
I don't know how you would want to do that over and over again.
Yeah. I saw a lot of people do that and just kept chasing that dragon. Hollywood Henderson, who was and this is how crazy it makes you. I'll give you one quick story.
Sure.
Hollywood Henderson was a professional football player, and he was a star, but he was a problem wherever he went, and he got traded quickly, and people would be glad to take him for a minute until they realized what he was up to, and he was the crack king in NFL. And every team that he got traded to, he had everybody in the hotel room smoking crack with him. And he tells this story of they were all in the room and everybody was, chasing the pipe, and it's my turn, no, it's my turn. They're all fighting each other for the crack pipe, and the curtains are drawn and it's dark in there, and there are 8 or 10 of them in there, and all of a sudden one of them hits the floor and slithers across the floor and creeps up and pokes out the window, and he looks out the window for about 20 minutes, and he hits the floor and comes back and he says, there are 20 cops in the parking lot. Henderson said, I hit that floor and crossed and looked out the window. I was there for about 10 minutes and came back and said, I can only see 18. So, that was the nature of that thing. It just turned into a horrible substance that destroyed everybody that touched it, basically.
Is it still, everybody that seems to be doing anything of that nature is crackhead. Are they still, do people still casually partake of powder? I don't even know. Like cocaine is a thing? I don't even know that.
It's been 30 years since I've done it.
Okay.
And in the 20 years leading up to it, I saw that stuff every day.
Yeah.
In the 30 years since, I've only seen it twice.
Right. I never hear about it.
I never hear about it either, but, I'm told people still do it. I don't see it, and I don't hang with people who do it.
Yeah, I really don't. It doesn't. It used to be going on. That's what I mean. Regular folks, people I would hang around with,
at every party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'd go to the bathroom, and you'd say, "You want to go to the bathroom?"
Yeah.
If someone asks you if you want to go to the bathroom, that means
that's what was going on. It got to where we never even went to the bathroom.
Yeah,
we just do it at the table at the clubs, and it was crazy.
And so it is a terrible drug. We're not all about that on this show at all. I don't promote it. Although I don't want to arrest someone that's done it.
No,
but that's another issue.
That's the drug war is a war on the weakest among us. It's a horrible, cowardly war.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, as you know, through your career, we've had different phases of awareness and practice in Canada with cannabis, and now we are heading into a series of rules that have been dreamed up over a certain amount of time. I'm sure you're well versed on what might be coming. I'd love to get your take on where it was or where it is at this second and where it will be on October 17th.
Well, I look at the government and I look at the bureaucratic response to this product, this amazing product.
And we're back to talking about cannabis again, by the way.
Cannabis. And they're acting like this is something that just happened, and they're trying to wrap their heads around how to deal with it. Well, listen, let me tell you, all you goofballs in those suits, we've been doing this for 50 friggin' years, 60 years, and we've been doing okay. And all of your bullshit and your lie making and your arguing for preventing this from being legalized up until now, everything that you talk about in that regard was based on a lie. So your entire argument about pot is lie-based. And now you're doing this driving while under the influence of marijuana.
Right.
Listen, if that was a problem, we'd know about that 50 years ago. 40 years ago.
You don't think they would have pounced on that like red meat?
We would have known about that. Look, we've known about it with alcohol. We changed the laws around alcohol. If marijuana was doing the same thing, we'd know about it. It's not. It's a lie. I don't know why they're doing it.
It's like seatbelts. I mean, when seatbelts came in, it was because so many people have been thrown through the car windshield, et cetera. And so time tested, they realized we do need seatbelts, and we're going to put them in.
Right.
And now they don't have this kind of data on cannabis, or
they don't.
Or they say
it's
they
a
do.
lie.
Yeah.
No, it's a total lie. And no one can show any proof. Look, here's the truth of the matter. Highway deaths have dropped by 11% since they legalized marijuana in Nevada. Okay, that's an interesting statistic. It's not going the way that MAD or people of that ilk want, but that's the truth. The truth. So and let's talk about something else. Opioids. In where they've legalized marijuana in the first year, they've seen a 15% reduction. By the fifth year, they've seen a 35% reduction in the number of opioid addictions. Right. So it's so interesting how this product has been so vilified, and I can't imagine why. I try and wrap my head around
you don't have any theories?
Reasonable argument about it. It's been noted forever that it makes people feel better.
Oh, yeah. So
obviously that's a problem for our government, and I don't understand why. Those people they make me think of them and us. They're dividers.
Sure.
Not unifiers.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I completely agree with all of this. It feels great to have somebody who's far more experienced and understands these things sing these same songs. But what I'm really having trouble with is the perception issue. Like, just before you came in, I said that I made a mistake. I said 24 hours, and I should have said 24 days. It's possibly 28 days that the military demands. Once you've, as a recreational user in the military now, these new rules, you have to wait 28 days before you do something important like fire a gun or maybe drive a tank or something.
What a bunch of
and then the cops are saying
stuff.
that you have 24 hours before having access to, and so many hours. And the thing that concerns me is, I get that those institutions want to set their rules, but I hate to think that someone who would think, well, the military knows what they mean, and I shouldn't do something important for 24
arbitrary.
weeks. It's so arbitrary, but people believe it like it's Santa Claus coming.
Well, because people want to believe what people in positions of authority say. People want to believe that. They want to trust our system.
Amazing.
People want to trust the system we live in. I want to trust the system we live in. I don't trust it at all,
right,
but I want to. And some people's desire to trust the system makes them believe fantasy. And this is where we find ourselves with pot. Look, let me just say, my biggest problem with what's happened with marijuana in this country is this. The road to this legalization, to making billionaires out of dozens of people, millionaires out of thousands of people, is what's happening right now in the cannabis world. That road's paved with broken families, incarcerated people, families whose lives have been destroyed, who have been shamed, who have been imprisoned, who've had everything taken from them and then given criminal records and been unable to enter society again. That's the constituents of the pavement through which these now millionaires and billionaires have driven over to get here.
Yeah.
All of the people who created this industry, who made this industry, who stood on the front lines and accepted incarceration for this industry, they got the finger as the feds gave it to the people. Sorry, I didn't finish that, but I'll finish it differently. Forgive me, indigenous people, but I feel like you must have felt years ago when the white man showed up and took your industry and gave it to the thieves who took it from you. Well, that's the way the marijuana industry is. The suits showed up. They saw the money. They took the industry from the people who created it. They gave them all criminal records, and then they gave the industry to their billionaire friends. That's what happened.
And then they tell you, oh, you were caught once being a bad guy. You can't participate in this.
And now you can't
new
work
thing.
In the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're leaning on, they don't want people with experience and knowledge to be bud tenders, and where they don't want people who know what's going on working there. The whole
want
thing.
to tell them one thing.
Oh,
bite me.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the mindset. This is the mindset of the same people that we do have here in Health Canada. Okay, so Health Canada is saying that they have asked 102 drug manufacturers, so that's a lot of companies, right, to stop. They have, I'm reading the news. This is off CBC. They've asked 102 drug manufacturers and distributors to stop marketing opioids. Can you please stop doing this? Can you imagine with your weed?
Stop doing
Is it okay
it.
if you could just stop? And then 25 of these folks have responded. So less than 25% have even responded. And the story goes on. It says, this summer, Health Canada asked that many to do it, and they all have only gotten back with that tiny less than 25%. 4,000 Canadians died from apparent opioid overdoses. That means there are more that aren't apparent, and that's up from 3,000 in 2016. As part of the government's response to the crisis, Health Minister Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor and the Director General of Health Canada wrote to 102 They wrote to them. Isn't that nice? They didn't send squad cars and distributors and affiliates earlier to ask them, stop pitching the drugs. And they are not getting back to them, and they are not responding. Then we have this quick story about the opioid billionaire is granted a patent for addiction treatment. The guy that... Sackler, who brought this stuff on us all. Not only is he not punished, he will also benefit from its alleged relief, which I'm sure will also not work so well.
Plus, the Sackler family, here's just another little bit of information about those evil people, the billionaires from the sale of oxycodone. The Sackler family is now pushing generic oxycodone in third world countries and just pushing it through like crazy. They've lost their market in the U.S., but now they're in the rest of the world. And here they are up to the same thing. And now they're going to make money on the other side of it too. Look, people like this, honestly, I don't believe in heaven or hell almost all the time, but when I hear stories like this, I want to believe there is a hell for people like that.
Oh, absolutely.
I just, I'm horrified when I think of all of the beautiful people I met in prison who are struggling human beings, just trying to make a living for their families, in poverty-stricken with no way out. And then I think of these people whose actions are responsible for an awful lot of these people being in prison.
It's incalculable, really.
It's totally incalculable. The cost of their billions in profits is in the trillions. It simply is. Look, when there's a tiny little town in West Virginia of 200 people that received, 20, 30 million oxycodone tablets from that company, and no one flagged it, we know what they were up to. They were pushing frigging heroin. Call it anything else you want. But this Sackler family and their friends were pushing heroin. That's what they were doing. And they were addicting a huge swath of the country. And now the United States is paying the price. But it's interesting. Only when the white American male gets hooked on heroin is the country willing to do anything about the opioid crisis, right?
Yeah.
And when the middle-class white male finds it in his system, then they're willing to do something about it. But when people in poverty, black, white, or otherwise, have these problems, they're vilified and incarcerated. Now they're thinking about, doing something else. It's, we've approached this, we put disease in the hands of law enforcement, and we see how well that's worked.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, Purdue Pharmacy, for making this, I put them as the granddaddy of all this. There are, of course, other companies, but the good news is, Brian, I don't know if you heard me, we sent them a letter to ask them to stop. I don't know what you're all upset about.
I know. It's, and oh my gosh, that's such an important letter. We sent them a letter. It's funny, I had a couple ounces of pot and had 14 cops show up at my house.
Wow. They didn't send you a letter saying,
please? They did not send me. They didn't give me any warning whatsoever.
Okay, well, this is the thing that I'm making light of it, and it's not to be made light of, but I can't deal with this shit unless I put some sarcasm and jokes in there, because it's just, it's a buffer to the soul. I really can't take this in full on, that not only are these people doing this, and they're horrible for doing it, and now profiting on some alleged it will be equally pushed as a relief to get off of this other drug. Not only are they doing it, they're obviously being accepted and allowed and mollycoddled, and their lobbying efforts do fall on willing ears, not deaf ears, and so they go around with this fake named company called Purdue Pharma, where these guys keep cranking out both the problem and the alleged cause of the problem. I won't be surprised to find out this alleged cure for the problem is also needing another drug to fix its unintended.
Well, drug companies are famous for giving you drugs that you have to chase with other drugs to deal with the repercussions of the drug.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, one after the other. And for the most part, up until now, that Coca-Cola and Molson's and Budweiser and Constellation Brands and all of these people got interested, it was an evil thing. But now that, we got, what are they going to do? Are they going to stop Coca-Cola people from going back and forth across the border? And the Bank of Montreal, who's got I don't know. I guess the bank has over $500 million, maybe $1 billion in the pot business.
Bank of Montreal,
Bank of Montreal,
deeply invested into the cannabis industry.
Yes. So if you're a shareholder in the Bank of Montreal, I wouldn't be telling them that at the border because they'll stop you from crossing the border. I personally am not a shareholder in the Bank of Montreal, however.
Right.
But it's it's so interesting. I think we're probably months away from legalization federally in the United States, at least medicinally, because there's just far too much money at play here. And I was invited to speak a few years ago in Vancouver to 500 or 600 stockbrokers, and when I was there, I realized, this is it. It's changed. Money wants this thing now. So money's going to get it. Money gets everything it wants. And look at the government. I mean, it's the best government money can buy. Here, the U.S., it's the same. It's a government bought by big money. And in the United States, that big money wants marijuana because there's trillions of dollars to be made there. And they're not going to let it stay illegal for much longer. Look, as of October 17th, the entire northern border of the United States is going to be selling legal marijuana. So all of these people in all of these states who like to smoke pot that cross the border to get this legal marijuana, when the United States realizes how much money is crossing the border in tourism for marijuana, quickly it will legalize.
Wow. That is a way to look at it. So that's I hope it goes that way. But listen, here's the thing: these little tropes, these belief systems that they keep laying out. I can't believe that people still fall for this. For example, Justin Trudeau's tweet recently that says it's been too easy for our kids to get marijuana. He's still calling it marijuana.
He's a weasel.
And for criminals to reap the profits.
He is a weasel.
But this sounds like a door in, though. This could be taken as a criticism. It's too easy for our kids to get it and for criminals to reap the profits. But it sounds like an admission. It sounds like it's easy for him to do it. But what about the sugar? What about Coca-Cola taking CBDs and cannabinoids and putting them in their drink? And you don't think that is going to be something that people are twigging on with sugar and everything else? Like, it's such an obvious lie to say you care about the kids when you're putting sugar in salty snacks. I mean, sugar's everywhere.
Sugar is a terrible thing, and it's so much worse than marijuana. Justin Trudeau, he did one thing: he legalized pot. He's done it completely maliciously and with a mean spirit. He said a year and a half ago, I heard him say, "This is not about people having fun."
Yeah,
it isn't.
Wow.
I don't know any other reason why people smoke marijuana, Mr. Trudeau. Your father smoked it, so and your mother smoked it, and you know what? They weren't criminals when they smoked it, but you act as though until you put a wrap around it, we're criminals, and that's just simply wrong. I expected more from him, and got so much less. The guy is
it's unreal.
Flat tire, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I don't care for the Conservatives either, but
no, of course, but at least the Conservatives will be able to, with clear conscience, relatively be able to cross the border and say, I didn't have anything to do with that act. In fact, I voted against it.
Right. Right. But, the Conservatives are totally with the money end of this thing, too.
Yeah. Well, I just find it odd that he passes what's called the Cannabis Act and then goes on Twitter and says, once again, the children and marijuana.
The children. And, when people pull out that children canard, I just want to throw up. What the heck? That is an excuse for not parenting our own children. I'm the parent of my 4 kids. I am the parent. The government is not their parent. The government will never be their parent. I am their parent, and I do not want the government to be the parent of any child in this country. The government is a lousy parent.
They are, and there's a very large fight going on here in Ontario. This is a complete sidebar, didn't think to talk about, but they're very upset. People are upset that they're changing their sexual education programs in Ontario schools because Doug Ford is a boor, and
what is with that guy?
We don't want him to take away everything from before.
What is with that guy? That he doesn't want people to have the information that they should have.
I don't know.
To make decisions that they need to have.
It's a trend.
To need to make.
You know,
It's,
like
he's a
Harper shutting
bizarre
down the
guy.
scientists. It's the same thing. We don't
Yeah.
want science. We don't mention that. Like in North Carolina, 6 years ago, they put up rules saying we don't want to do any litigation or any legislation that's contingent upon anything to do with weather control. And then they got hammered by this storm and everything came in. Yeah, it's willful ignorance. I can only imagine that people scamming and doing the scamming think they're going to be able to make their millions and enjoy it in a world that's not affected by all this stuff.
It's people who don't really care that their children are going to have to pay the price for all of our fucked up efforts, basically.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
They don't think about that.
Well, this is an article that we are fascinated by on this topic. Trudeau himself, and as you say, could be barred. Now, this is just on ipolitics.ca, but it says this is a note that the Trudeau could be barred from the U.S. As he has smoked pot, says a U.S. lawyer. A U.S. immigration lawyer is saying that Justin admitted to smoking as an MP, and the second that the Prime Minister is no longer Prime Minister, see, traveling on diplomatic passport. But is his family, are his children, is everybody else? Like, if you're okay to go to the States, what about your kids as a diplomat?
Well, my kids are all Americans, so fortunately.
No, you don't have a diplomat, though. I mean the collective you. I meant if you're a diplomat, you still can't bring your wife and your kids if you're, Bank of Montreal shareholders who also drink Coca-Cola and other normal things. They're really drawing some crazy lines here.
Yeah, that can't go on.
No.
That simply can't go on. If you've got, fully, they expect by the time this is legalized, a year from legalization, that over half the population will have smoked marijuana or consumed it in one way or another.
Sure.
I simply cannot imagine that the United States is going to keep half the Canadians out of the country, although, who knows?
Yeah, it is hard to tell. This other little sort of related clip about Trudeau has left $372 million originally intended to help the veterans, unspent since taking office, bad on its own, but also because he criticized the previous Conservative government for doing the exact same thing with a very similar number. So he's told them that he doesn't have money for them. We don't have money, and now there's this massive amount of money. And while they're changing their access and causing problems for them to realize access to cannabis.
So we have money to send these men and women over to foreign countries to take bullets, to deliver bullets, to take lives, to have their lives put in jeopardy. And we put them in all kinds of danger and bring them back and expect them to be okay. And if they're not, well, you got to figure that out because we don't have the money for you. Why does anybody join the military when they hear stories like that is what I don't understand.
I really don't know. It's very
I
limiting.
would never join the military in a million years for that very reason alone. I mean, I'm not a gun shooter, so I wouldn't join just because of that. But even if I was a gun shooter, these people do not have your back.
Right.
You're out there having this country's political back by taking shots in Afghanistan or wherever else you may be for a bunch of people who do not have your back. And when you come home, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, we don't have the money for you. Why would you join an outfit that treated you that way?
I don't know. I think a lot of people think, well, someone's got to go guarantee the freedoms that we have here, and so they think. I don't know. A lot of people are interested in going. I know lots of people, and I'm friends with people. But it's never been interesting to me to go and do that. For that absolute reason, and this arbitrary control that they put down. Before we get into advertising and the perception...
advertising. Can we hang on 1 second?
Sure.
So no advertising for pot in Canada.
Right.
But you turn on the business channel,
yeah,
and there is one ad after the other for pot companies, but not for the pot, for their stock.
Oh, well, what do they expect to bump up the stock with if they don't sell weed?
They tell we produce the best weed in Canada. We're this, we're that, this weed, that weed. This is Canopy Growth. This is Afria. This is Aurora. They advertise on the business network, these pot companies, that there is supposedly no advertising of marijuana products in Canada.
Right.
Their word is, we're not advertising marijuana, we're advertising the company's share value.
Wow.
Okay? So they get a pass
Yeah.
to do that, to promote their company. But if I want to put out the Potfather brand, I can't do that.
Can't do it.
If I want to put out the Brian O'Day brand, I can't do that.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy is immense. You know, what's really interesting is that there are bureaucrats who sit around thinking up this shit.
Oh, that's what I think. Yeah, it's
Just sit
amazing.
there. Listen, Colorado.
Yeah.
I was trying to help some people in Colorado, doing some consulting for them. And I had to get involved with packaging. So I talked to my friend, and he said, call this guy. He's a packaging guy, and he'll get you the compliance, packaging compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So I called him, and he said, well, the packaging compliance is about 260 pages. Are you sure you want to read it? You can talk to me for $1,000 a day, and I'll tell you what's in it. And believe me, for a day or 2 days with me, you'll get everything you need to get out of that compliance. So some bureaucrat sat around, a bunch of bureaucrats, and wrote a 268-page compliance book on packaging for marijuana in Colorado.
Unreal.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you let government get into business.
Well, this is what I've raised on the show many times, is that one of their more powerful complaints, such as what about the children and some other things, are that if you use cannabis and you know this is part of your life, it's either a crutch. It's not a crutch if it's a medicine, then it's a medicine that you need. But if you need cannabis, then it's a crutch. But the thing is that they tell you that this stuff doesn't work. And then they tell you don't have enough research. And then they tell you can't advertise. And then they advertise at concerts.
What about the children? Okay. Let's talk about the children.
Okay.
Let's talk about the children who watch Hockey Night in Canada, brought to you by Molson's. Let's talk about that. Alcohol. Okay? Let's talk about the kids with all the Molson's T-shirts, with the Molson's on the T-shirts, the alcohol.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about the most vile substance in this planet. And forgive me, I'm in a bar.
You're leaving out the bikini babes.
But the fact is, alcohol causes more carnage on this planet than anything else. And tobacco is probably right there, right next to it. But the two substances that the government's been giving us for years cause more carnage than anything else. And that's okay for kids? What about the kids? You know what? Go fuck yourself with what about the kids, you lying bastard.
Oh,
that is such a false argument. And anytime anyone says the children, I know they've run out of real argument, because now they're telling me that the government's going to be my kids or my grandkids' parent. No, you're not. You are not. And that's just it. So what about the children?
Just these fake little hooks that they put on. It's just a fake little hook. But this other fake little hook that they put on is, look, we're designing all of this. We know what we're doing. You terrible people want to use this stuff. So finally we have to design some things. But we're concerned that you're going to damage your brain. Now, I look at the architecture, the rules, the hypocrisies. I go, your brain is already damaged. What are you talking about? I'm not emulating your way of thinking. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is the funny part to me. They're worried about your brain. And I don't even think I could come up with a series of laws so screwed up if I tried to sit down and come up with a series of laws so screwed up. It's amazing to me.
Well, they put in the positions of authority in the file were incarcerators. Incarcerators.
Yeah.
People who were locking us up were put in charge of the file. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That says everything I need to hear right there. Okay.
Blair.
The guys who are locking us up are in charge of the file. And you look at Ernie Eves, former premier of this province.
Let's go there.
He's the head of the biggest pot company in Jamaica. The former deputy commissioner of the RCMP, the head of another pot company. I mean, I did a tour with the RCMP once, and I come from a position of legalizing all drugs.
Right.
Because, illegalizing, making drugs illegal and vilifying the weakest among us is a bad idea. And until we legalize all drugs, listen, there are only two ways people get drugs, legally or illegally. And you've seen what the way that we've handled it has worked. We've built prisons and we've filled them up with millions of people. So obviously that's not the right way. So let's turn it over to people who are actually health experts who can help people. I have not met an addict who wants to be one when they get there. Mm-hmm. So we need to help people, not vilify them, not isolate them, not separate them from us. We need to help them back in. And You know, we don't have governments that are interested in that, but we have governments that are interested in punishing the weakest among us.
Yeah, I think it's really not about changing the mind of the government. It's about making the truth and the facts available and aware to anybody that can challenge the government, because they only get away with this stuff because most people don't know about it.
Most
I had people
don't
telling me,
question it.
I'm sure you had people coming up to you because I had this. They know you're got some kind of history with cannabis, like they do with me if they know me, and they come up and they've been saying things like, "Wow, hey, October 17, you must be excited, eh? You must be happy. It's finally going to be legal." And they have no idea the exact import of their words. The word legal, what does it mean? Why would I be happy that something really fucked up is about to be born? You know, I look at this legislation of, if the legislation were perfect and you compared it to architecture, those are some pretty fine plans there, and the building's going to be wonderful and grand. But they've just delivered shit from Home Depot. Here's some 2x4s, here's some nails. This is what it is. Make do. We'll fix it as we go.
And then you go to a place like Newfoundland, the government is only letting the retailers make 8%.
Profit?
Yeah, that's all they're allowed to make on the pot.
How do they figure they're going to manage to control
that? You know
that?
what? How does a retailer make it making 8%? I don't know.
Why would you want to do that?
Most retailers I know are 50-50. They make half, they pay half. You know, I buy a product for 50 cents, I sell it for $1. Here, you buy a product for $1, you sell it for $1.08.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So the government wants all the money.
Isn't it funny too that
all the money, they want all the money.
They go on these tours. They'll do speaking town hall events in their province and across the country. Kathleen Wynne did one here, and one of their constant politician laments is that they're examining the landscape and they're open for suggestions to find out ways to drum up the economy. And Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau have taken the economy. Imagine if we had shops popping up here and there. Hey, say your weed's not as good. Well, you're going out of business. My weed's better. I'm doing okay. Like that thing, you know, let's do that.
Yeah, open market.
And, you know, democracy, you know, the money you say you need that you don't have right now for all kinds of things. I don't know what the tax income right now is at in Colorado, but better than here on it. And they just don't exercise any of these options while they tell you this stuff. And that's fake, you know, about the kids, and we can't advertise it. But we will advertise it to the people that are the multimillionaires we already made the deals with.
Right.
What do you know about Ernie Eves? I find it amazing that a guy who was a conservative premier, he was the actual finance minister of this province and then became the premier later on after Harris.
Another miserable character.
Yeah, but a big star on the blue team, right?
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And so he goes down to Jamaica.
Very miserable guy. Blame poverty on the poor.
Opens up a cannabis or is the head of some kind of. So fill me in here.
Largest
What do you know
cannabis
about that
company
guy?
in Jamaica. I don't know much about it other than that's that. And, you know, just the fact that it is that. Look at John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House in the United States, who said good people don't smoke marijuana.
He was an alcoholic.
He owns a bar,
Yeah.
smokes cigarettes, chain smoker. So here's a guy who had all kinds of bad things to say about pot, is now the chairman of a Michigan pot company.
Is that right?
And his word was, I've had a change of heart. No, you had a change of wallet. Let's tell the truth about this. You have a change of heart. You got money, and that's how you change your position.
Like
You got
Julian
money.
Fantino, the cop, who's at this.
Another one. A paid shill for the government's pot legislation.
I can't believe that there may be someone now only just now beginning to get the chance to rebuild their life that was taken from them by Julian's arrest back in the day, and they're just kind of getting out of jail and trying to figure things out maybe now while this guy rolls around like a pig in a trough with our dollars.
I got friends who are still in prison for pot, who got 75 years for pot that didn't exist. Conspiracy.
What do you mean it didn't exist?
Conspiracy charge.
Oh, I see.
No pot.
Wow.
And they're never getting out. Basically, they're going to die there. And there are a lot of people in the United States who are in prison for pot who are going to die there.
God, that's
and
unreal.
That's just the way it is. See, these people, back when I got sentenced to 10 years, I thought that was a huge sentence in 91. Well, when I got there, I realized, gee, it was actually a tiny sentence.
Did you do full 10?
Lucky guys. No, I didn't. I got transferred to Canada, and they let me out. But the people in the U.S. are just doing thrilling time for pot, and many of them will die in there. because they were sentenced under the new law, and the new law means you serve 8.5 days of every 10 days you were sentenced.
Wow.
So there's no more parole or.
It is monstrous. I can't even believe it. I mean, when I started to realize, based on my reading and understanding things and you know, studying the politicians that were involved, I thought, this thing is going to be so bad. And I'm sitting in front of it now. I was dead right about it. But I was paying attention. It's not like I'm a genius. I don't think most people pay attention to it. You know, whereas my life depended on it. So I was very much on point. You know.
Yeah, and you know, in the U.S., if you were ever charged, there was no winning. I had one of my friends in there. He got charged with a bunch of other guys, and they all pleaded out and got 5 years. He decided to challenge it, and because he challenged it, he got 35.
Wow.
And, you know, you got to realize in the U.S., when you're charged, 99+% of federal charges end up in convictions.
Sure.
And most of them are negotiated convictions, plea agreements.
Yeah.
Because they threaten you with a million things, so you're just glad to accept one and run away.
Wow. Let's go back to prison for a second, because I want to talk about the mind. I really believe, and I think I would say I know, but if I had to argue with someone, I'd be back to the position of I believe. But I believe that the cannabis, the THC specifically, that people get afraid about when they use Rick Simpson oil or something and they just want to use CBDs, that element itself I credit with some of my ability to find awarenesses to further help me out of my cancer jam that I wouldn't have come across and wouldn't have meditated on and wouldn't have thought about. And here you say, when you were off to prison, that you weren't planning on writing anything but words to save your life/mind. As you wrote down what you heard happening around you, you thought it might be an interesting process to write the stories of the major delineating, course-committing events in your life in a chronological manner so that you could sniff the tracks which led you to such an address vis-a-vis prison. It can be a useful exercise. You've determined to see and smell and know from whence you come. And if you don't like where you are, you can realign your pieces going forward. So this is amazing to me that it seems like okay, so you're in the box, can't get out, and you're getting to the awareness that, okay, I'm going to lay all this down here. This is helpful. This is a therapy, isn't it? It's like
that's not how it happened. So here's how it happened.
I was reading your website.
I went to prison. Yeah, and that, you know, that is kind of the wordy thing, but here's how it really happened.
Sure.
I walked in prison, I was fucking freaked out. I watched American Me before I got there, and I was just in a panic. I went through A&O, admission and orientation, got issued clothes. and I'm not lying when I tell you this, my underwear that I was issued had stains in them.
Oh, God.
So my pants were 4 inches too big for me. It was insane. I mean, it was literally the most ridiculous, unbelievable thing. So I am in a panic inside my mind, and I get told to go down to J Unit, which was right next to A&O, and go in there. There was a guard on the door. His name was Rivas, and ask him to tell me where to go, get a bunk. So I walked down into J Unit. And, buddy, there were bodies swarming everywhere. Terminal Island, Los Angeles Harbor, it was built for 400, and there were 1,300 of us in there.
Wow.
So I walked in, and there was this giant guard, Rivas, and he said, just go look in there and come back and tell me where you found a bed. So I looked down this aisle, and there was a row of 30 bunks outside 3 tiers of cells. And I ended up with the middle bunk outside a cell that was used for the toilet for all of the people in the bunks outside in the aisleway. So as I was walking down to find that bunk, there was an old bookcase off to the side, and there was a piece of paper torn out of an exercise book and a broken piece of pencil just sitting on that next to a Louis L'Amour book. And they looked at it, and my mind was just going crazy. In AA, we call it radio station KFUK. My head was on K-fuck, and it wouldn't stop. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong in my mind. And I was in such a panic. And when I saw that pencil and paper, it occurred to me that if I just wrote shit down that was in my head, that if I just put it on paper and got it out of me, that I wouldn't be as frightened. So I grabbed that piece of paper and that pencil, and that's when I started to write, was right away that first day. And I wrote every day. And before I left Terminal Island, I'd written over 2,000 pages.
Did you get anything beyond paper and pencil once you established that trend, or did you just keep accumulating paper and pencil? Or like, did they give you a pen and a notebook? Or?
Oh, there were typewriters in the law library, but which I used, but I found writing by hand, and of course I got pens and paper.
Yeah.
Once I found my way around that prison, I got everything I wanted.
Right.
But I preferred to write by hand most of the time, although I did a lot of writing on typewriter because I used to send it out to friends of mine who sent it to 100 different people who supported me before I went to prison.
Right.
And it was sort of like a newsletter. And it was through that book came eventually.
Right. You were able to crystallize things, because what I've noticed is that from what happened to me, my journey, which is completely different from yours, but still traumatic, what I find is whenever I tell people from A to Z how it is, you get different highlights and notes from the same story.
Yeah, of course.
And the more it's burned in, you could tell the same story 10 times, it comes out differently. I mean, a person could listen to 10 different tellings of the same story and get things, because you can't cram it all in. You can't remember it all.
Well, and there are angles.
Yeah.
Depending on the perception on your where your perspective. So, there are 10 different angles to every story that I have in that book, because all of the people involved, I'm sure, have different ideas of how those stories were as well.
Sure. Yeah.
A friend of mine read the book before it was published, and he said, "Well, I would have," and I said, "Well, why don't you?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So, because this is my take. That's all.
There's horrible things that happen to people in prison, and there are certain echelons of respect. And of course, a child abusing sex criminal is the lowest of the low in the world of prison, and there's certain ranks we understand. Where did you sit in there? Did you garner? You're obviously not a pedophile. I mean, you're in there for weed. Did you garner respect? Did you have an upper echelon? Were there folks wanting to help you? Were there folks giving you a hard time because you were a high flyer?
Terminal Island.
Yeah.
It was in groups. Terminal Island were cliques. So there was La Familia, the Black Guerrillas, the Aryans, and us. You see, when I got popped, they popped all of the Southeast Asia smuggling groups at the same time. We all got brought down at the same time. So when I ended up in that prison, there was a bunch of guys from a bunch of different groups. There were like 10 different major Southeast Asian smugglers.
Yeah.
They were all locked up in various prisons in the federal system in the U.S. So I was in with a bunch of those guys. And, people, so they called us the jet set. So we all hung together. Most of us worked we all worked for the rec department, the recreation. But I split off because I went to work in the staff training center. Terminal Island was a training ground for staff for the Western Bureau of Prisons in the Western District.
Right.
So I got a job in there because it was during Desert Storm, and they had a room in there filled with surplus 5-pound tins of nuts from Desert Storm that were supposed to be given to the prison, to all of the prisons, but they were ending up being given to all the guards, and all the guards were going out with nuts every day.
Not a surprise.
There was a warehouse full of Twinkies and crap like that, all came from Desert Storm that all the guards were scooping. They were meant to go to the prisoners. So I got a job in there with a former CIA agent who took a fall for the agency, a guy named Ron Rewald. His story is unbelievable. It's in a book called Disavowed, if you ever want to read an amazing
Thank you
story.
for that. Sure.
But every day I'd go in there and I would the rec shack was right next to the staff training center. So the moment there were no cops in the vicinity, we'd start offloading all the nuts and all of the Twinkies and shit out to the rec center, and all of it would then get distributed to the yard from there. And I would use it to trade for food, basically. You know, I would give you a couple of tins of nuts for a case of fruit. Someone in the kitchen, we, you know, use it.
You found your way and worked, but you weren't you know, subject to any kind of violence or fighting or
absolutely not. I was
backdoor visits.
We were a tight group of guys, you know, that we all just hung together and minded our own business, and that's just, listen, you got 1,300 people living in a space built for 400. In order for that thing not to blow up, you got to have a lot of tenacity, a lot of perseverance, and a lot of respect for other people's space.
Right.
You don't touch other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Even though there's 1,400 of you, you walk sideways.
Right.
And you don't rub other people. You don't touch them. You just give everyone as much space as you can give them.
Sure.
And
in a place where you weren't designed to do that, in a place not designed to...
And for people who they, you know, are the worst in society, let me tell you something. There was so much accommodation and human accommodation in that place, people giving space to other people to be whoever they are or whatever they were, that I've yet to experience on the outside. So, you know, it was truly, you know, it was one of those great gifts that I would have turned down. What can I say?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
I would have turned it down.
You would have turned it down, but
that keeps on giving.
You've lived it now, yeah.
And the awarenesses that keep coming from it. You know, I keep learning from that experience.
But you did wind up there, and at one point, the reason you wound up there is because you had a company of 120 or so people, and you had your pants down with 75 tons of weed. And I also really want to hear the story about how nuts it must have been to be in a faulty plane over the Pacific, and what you might have been carrying at that time, and where your mind went and how you got out of it.
Those are two deals that are generation apart, but
yeah, sure.
In the 70s, I had a DC-6 that we got in a graveyard. An old troop carrying plane was a bucket of bolts, and we took off. We leased an airstrip in a town called Moultrie, Georgia, a disused airstrip. We leased it from the town of Moultrie under the auspices of being a mechanic facility for aircraft, and they loved it. They gave it to us for $1. And then we got this plane. We took off and had problems halfway down, and we lost all of our hydraulics basically. And the pilot turned to me and he said, "Do you want to crash in the U.S. or Colombia?" So anyway, we went back to the U.S., and I got back in the back of the plane, started pouring hydraulic fluid into the system when we dropped the landing gear down, hoping that there would be enough fluid in the system to
make it bust
pressure
open.
So it would lock it open, and it worked.
Oh, wow.
So it took us a day to fix the plane. We took off down there again, and when we landed down in Colombia in Riohacha and the Guajira Peninsula, we lost the nose gear steering, went off the runway. Anyway, between the jigs and the reels, we lost one of the motors. But the mechanic who helped us said that we could make it back with 3 motors. So we put 16,000 pounds on it and took off. And
wow.
2 minutes later, we were in the ocean.
Gosh. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give away trade secret, and I'm not going to ask you to invade your privacy, but we are talking about a long time ago, and I'm curious in the mechanics of how it works that some white Canadian guy from up in Newfoundland is now down in Colombia brokering. Like, how do you even do that? Not like I'm gonna, but I'm just fascinated because if you said to me, okay, listen, we need some weed, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, you couldn't do it today.
But
anyway.
I wouldn't know how to do it even in your time.
Well, I didn't either. You know, I got out of prison in '72, and I had nothing, and I had a ticket. I bought a ticket to Colombia, and I had $500, and I had a card with a guy's name and an address of a restaurant where I could go and ask the owner of the restaurant to find this guy.
Wow.
Okay? And I couldn't speak Spanish. And that's what I did. A friend of mine picked me up at the prison when I got out of prison in '72 in Newfoundland at Her Majesty's Penitentiary.
Oh, yeah.
We had no toilets or running water in there, no phone calls, one visit every 2 weeks. It was bizarre.
Well, that's because Her Majesty herself never
Yeah.
goes. That's the problem.
And so I took off and went down to Colombia, and that's, with $500 in my pocket, and I just started.
So
and
that
I
deal
just
worked,
kept going.
obviously. That
Yeah,
you
that
did
was
find
a
the
little
guy.
Coke in my hand that I walked through customs, and the next was the Coke in the suitcase.
Wow.
And the next was I got a boat. I had a ship. I had a 100-foot Baltic trader down in the Caribbean that
For
we
weed.
got in Europe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we brought it down there to get weed.
Wow.
And we lost a few loads, and then I got the plane. And that's when I dropped the plane. And then, I fooled around for years, just, middling and doing stuff like that, and then started to do some deals out of Southeast Asia with some friends of mine. And finally, we organized a 75-ton buy from the Vietnamese military.
Wow.
And we brought it over in 2 distinct loads that were a year apart. And we brought the first load in, and the second part, they were watching us the entire time. And the day before we were going to bring it down and offload it, we found out that they were on us. So with that information, basically, this is what saved us. We knew that they knew, but they didn't know that we knew they knew.
That's a good defense.
So we orchestrated something for them to look at, which they did.
Wow.
And while we had their attention, we came in another door, and we offloaded everything. And finally, when we orchestrated for them to hit our boats, there was the scent of fresh donuts, which had just been taken off the fryer, and coffee. And not a joint, not a cigarette paper, nothing. And we had 3 big ships, a 100-footer, a 160-footer, and a 58-footer, and there was nothing but the smell of coffee and donuts.
Wow, that's the best.
And they flipped out. And so while we didn't get busted, I knew...
I thought they would have liked the donuts at least.
Yeah. Well, I knew that, eventually we're going to hear about this. And sure enough, 3 years later,
right,
the hammer fell.
They carry a personal vengeance into their job.
Well, I don't blame them for that. I mean, that was real huge egg on their face, and I knew that, we're going to be thrilled for this at a certain point, and sure enough, we were.
There's a book out called Jackpot that features Barry Foy and a lot of his cohorts in the Carolinas who, in the 70s, basically did the same journey you were doing all the time
they
around
were doing
the
it out of Colombia.
Yeah, and Lebanon and other places, and on that coast up and down, and so what I heard from them, they all to a man were happy with the jail term they got vis-a-vis the money they got later, and they all felt good about doing it. They all knew at the time, although we didn't know CBDs and THC and all that kind of stuff, that their clientele were just basically good folks who were reporting back that they did so feel better using this stuff, and they had a thing I want to ask you, basically the gentleman smugglers. You get caught with whatever, no guns, hands up, yes sir, no sir. Were you like that too, or were you packing?
No. We did $250 million in that last load, and there wasn't a gun, but not one of us had a gun.
Wow. What would have happened had you been?
And like I would go to New York, drive down in my motor home into the fashion district in New York. Stranger would be standing on a corner. I would know it was him, the suitcases and a glove in one hand, and I'd just pull up on the corner. I'd open the door, the motorhome. This guy would get in with the suitcases, drop the suitcases off, shake my hand, and go, and there'd be $10 million there. Wow. And I'd never see the guy before or after.
Wow.
And, that's how it was done. And we did $250 million that way and didn't lose a dime.
Right.
And didn't have a gun.
So if the cops walked in and caught you red, you'd be
they
just
did.
like, yeah,
when they arrested me, the first thing they said was, "Do you have a gun?" I said, "You're the one with the gun."
Right.
And then all of a sudden there were 8 of them with guns.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's amazing.
Another day.
That's another day. So where do you see yourself now? You were in trouble a long time ago. Did your time in the States, and now you reside in Canada, and you've become. You've taken a lot of this history and knowledge, and you rolled out a bit of a career for yourself in television. When did that start, and what were the kinds of things you were doing? I know about the show Redemption on CBC, but you were...
Well, in the 90s, 2001, my wife said to me one day, "You got to get a job," because I'd been losing money on the stock market, and I'd never had a job. And I said, get a job? Who the fuck's going to hire me?
Right.
And she said, oh, why, you can't do anything? I said, well, I've never had a job. She said, let's see. You had 110 guys working with you in secret. You did $250 million worth of business in secret. You had trucking companies, shipping companies. You had cell phones before anyone had cell phones. And you know how to do anything, really.
Right.
Sit down and write a resume. And so I sat down and I wrote like a resume, and I went, oh, fuck, right. I'm going down to Midland Walwyn and getting a job as a stockbroker with this resume.
Yeah.
But it occurred to me when I wrote it, hey, I could put this as an ad in the paper. I think I'll do that. So I wrote this ad, and the ad was headlined, Former Marijuana Smuggler. Having recently completed a 10-year sentence for importing 75 tons of marijuana into the United States, I now seek a legal means of employment to support my family. I'm an expert in logistics. I'm a technical expert. I speak 3 languages, and I listed attributes, and then I listed for personal references the district attorney who prosecuted me, and a few other people. And even though I didn't cooperate, and I was one of 2 guys in 55 of us that got indicted that didn't cooperate, this guy loved me for not talking. Figure that one out. So
I'm trying, but you're still talking.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
bizarre.
So I put that, I called the Globe and Mail, and I explained the ad to them, and they eventually refused to run it.
They didn't run it.
And they wouldn't run it.
Why not? That's a great ad.
And they wouldn't even talk to me about it. So I called the National Post, and I said I'd like to run an ad on page 3, right in the middle of the page. I want a 4x2-inch ad. How much? They said $1,300. I said, okay, I'm going to fax you over the copy, send me back a blue line, I'll approve it, and we'll go. And they said, okay,
Nice.
fair enough. So I faxed them over a copy for the ad. You know, my phone rang 30 seconds later.
Right.
Brian, look, can I make a suggestion? And I said, yeah, go for it. He said, listen, for $1,300, we'll run that ad every day for a week in the Financial Post in the classified section.
Yeah.
Or you can have the one shot for $1,300 in the middle of
paper.
page 3.
Right.
He said, but I'm going to tell you, you could put that ad in the last corner of the last page of this paper. I guarantee you are going to get
Nothing.
1 million responses.
1 million responses. Okay,
That's
but
what
they're
he
going to be
said.
funny ones
So,
too, I'm sure. Some of them.
The ad you had to write by mail and put a stamp on an envelope. There was no email attached. It was just you had to write the post office box at the National Post. Well, man, I got 600 responses from all over the world.
Wow.
And every police agency in the United States offered me a job.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
What, as what? A drug recognition expert?
Yeah, consultant.
All these names?
Just, smugglers, organ smugglers. It was bizarre, the number of job offers.
Organ smugglers.
Organ smugglers, yeah.
Offered you a job because you used to do
because
pot.
I was a smuggler.
What would you do? Be smuggling organs?
Yeah.
What kind? Like Hammond, B3? What are we talking
we're
here?
talking
Leslie?
about kidneys. And,
oh, I know. I was
that
kidding
kind of thing.
because I don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
These are people who would make deals for organs to be bought from poor people and sold to rich people, basically.
Americans?
Yeah, this guy was an American. The guy, I turned that guy's letter over to the National Post, to Charlie Gillis, who wrote the story on me. And geez, the next week they did a whole expose on organ smuggling.
Wow.
Anyway, so the responses came from all over the world, and one of the things that happened was I got invited to be a guest on a late-night talk show on which I met an actor, and that actor introduced me to these other people, and geez, before you know it, I was producing a television show called Creepy Canada. I was the one with the money, so I could back the thing. It ultimately cost me $250,000. I had bad partners. They stole my money. And, I kind of put it down to getting a PhD in the television business, and that's what it cost me.
Yeah.
And then some years later, I did that thing with Kevin O'Leary. I did How to Make Money Selling Drugs with Matthew Cook. That was a lot of fun. And if you haven't seen that film, you really must see it.
What's it called?
How to Make Money Selling Drugs. It is an extraordinary documentary. And we launched it at TIFF Got a distribution deal with Tribeca, and it did very well.
That's great. So do you have current television plans, or what are you involved in at the moment?
Just before I came here, I got a call from a guy. These people are asking me to help them put this TV show together in L.A. that I came up with the idea, and I got a bite on it, and then I decided, you know what, I don't want to do this business anymore, so I stopped. Some friends of mine in the business want to take that show and the contacts that I made to do the show in L.A., and so I'll probably turn them on to it. I'm not interested in the TV business anymore. I'm interested in the hemp business.
Okay.
And I'm in the hemp business in Colombia, have a hemp farm. And we're planting 1,000 acres in January.
Is it in the north or south of Colombia, or you're not able to say?
It's in Cali.
Okay.
It's right on the equator.
Right, yeah. Right, it's sort of the middle, isn't it?
Pardon?
Is it the middle of Colombia?
Yeah, it's perfect. It's we get 13 hours a day of sun. We get 3 crops a year. And the yield, CBD yield, is 2 to 2.5 times greater than the U.S.
Wow.
So, it takes an acre of property growing hemp, gives it over 6 times the value of a U.S. acre of hemp. Wow. Because 3 yields a year and 2 to 2.5 times the CBD yield.
And good sun, because you're on the line.
You're just on the equator, so you have sun all day.
Now, do you experience any kinds of difficulties in Colombia doing what you do? Is it legal what you're doing? I guess
hemp
it is.
Is legal.
Hemp
is
legal.
Hemp's legal.
So you experience no trouble vis-a-vis the Medellin cartel of
no,
all
none
that
of
stuff?
It's not like that in Colombia anymore.
They don't have the Medellin cartel?
Not like that.
No.
I'm sure there are people, there's still cocaine in the world. There's still heroin in the world.
Right.
It still comes from down there. I'm sure there are people doing it, but it's not like the days of Pablo Escobar and cartels and the threats and the crazy society. It's not like that anymore. Since they put the peace deal together, Colombia has become really the country that I've always known it to be, which is an awesome country filled with extraordinary, beautiful people, and just gorgeous. I just love Colombia.
There was I was there 18 months ago, and there was not quite, but I really noticed something funny coming in from the Bogota airport into Bogota. It's so great. It's so easy. There's no traffic, even though it's busy. The way they design the roads, and there's this bike path down the middle that's grass swath. It's fantastic. But what I noticed is there's a lot of defacing, and they obviously get away with it, of the conquerors that came over. They're not fans of having been imperialized through invasion, and all of these statues of the great Europeans are so wildly defaced that no one's bothering to do anything about it. They just destroy their statues and leave them there, instead of here they want to take them down.
Yeah,
it's pretty funny to me.
I never had too many problems in Colombia. I had some issues down there. I got held up by the cops one time, but it just took money to fix it.
Yeah.
And that probably wouldn't happen today.
Yeah, no, it's a different scene. I mean, you're coming
and
from
I'm
a
70-year-old white guy.
Yeah,
I'm invisible. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Not a 70-year-old white. You'll learn the older you get, the more invisible you become.
Yeah.
And I could hop in a little car and drive down the street and never be noticed for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a nice thing to know.
Kind of a nice
that
thing,
I've
especially where
reached
you've
that
been.
Place.
Yeah. And so this hemp business of yours, you're just manufacturing it and people are buying it. Do you have any interests in companies that actually create hemp products?
We do that.
You do that? What do you have?
We create CBD products. Our whole thing with hemp is to extract the CBD, CBG, CBN, THCV, and so on. Isolate all of the products and also create full spectrum oil from the hemp.
Wow.
And our primary focus is on our European clients who buy kilos in the hundreds and thousands of kilos. And then we have a white label company that we make. We have our own company. We make our own CBD products. Have 180 SKUs right now.
Wow.
Every kind of product you can think of, including suppositories. For heaven's sake, they're called
great.
rocket ships. And it's CBD suppositories. But basically anything you can do with CBD, we're doing it. And now the new one is CBG, is where a lot of the focus is going. CBG is they're experiencing practically instant relief from heroin addiction, anxiety, extreme anxiety relief. And whereas CBD is between 5,000 and 7,000 US a kilo, CBG is 80,000 a kilo right now.
Wow,
Now,
that's
the
one of the
price is gonna come
cannabinoids
down.
that's been isolated.
Yes.
This is kicking the door open, and it's quick.
Yes.
So that's going to be contributing towards your turnaround if you're doing a full spectrum oil, because that's in there someplace.
Yes.
Right.
But if you isolate CBG, you'll get a greater response for extreme anxiety and addictions.
is anyone selling that? Because we only hear about
you can now get
CBG.
some products with CBG in it in the U.S. I've seen it in Colorado and California, but it's extremely expensive.
Well, how about this then? Let me bounce this number off of you. There, in a long 20 years or so, or more perhaps, there's a company in England called GW Pharmaceuticals. They've been researching and growing cannabis for medicinal purposes for quite some time, while the British government's been saying there's no benefit to this, shut up, get away. So they've had this sort of vacuum to develop over the years, and it's still a different scene in England now. It's nowhere near as accessible as we have it here. However, GW Pharmaceuticals is releasing a fantastic medicine that is supposed to help you, and it's $33,000 a year to get this prescription, or you would have to pay that or work it through your insurance, so you're paying less than that hopefully, but $33,000
are they saying it's good for
CBD to turn it into a drug, and it'll be licensed, and it's okay, and the FDA's cool with it, and so is the British government. It's $33,000 a year for a decent supply of CBDs, when you could probably do that at home with some plants for a few $100 or $1,000, right, for the year, something like that.
Well, if you could get your hands on a high CBD yielding marijuana plant, like hemp yields CBD. The average industrial hemp yields 10 to 12%. But there are marijuana plants that have been bred to produce less than 1% THC, but 35% CBD.
Wow.
And, that's exceptional product. Look, the markup in CBD is monstrous. Let me just give you an example.
Sure.
A bottle of CBD water that costs $5. It's got 10 milligrams of CBD in it. Well, 1 gram will give you 100 of those bottles, okay?
Wow.
That's $500 for 1 gram. If you're paying $7,000 for a kilo, that gram costs you $7.
Yeah.
So you're getting, the markup is extraordinary. The creams that cost 50, 60 bucks got, $5
Wow.
worth of CBD in them, maybe less. So the markup's extraordinary. We're trying to affect that with our product line.
Yeah.
And then CBG, well, very few people are isolating CBG is the issue. And,
because it's so new to the awareness that it's so fantastic.
The awareness of its impact is new,
Yeah.
and it occurs much less frequently in the plant than CBD. So, your yield is probably 1 to 2%, and you still have to put it through an extraction process, the same as you do if you're extracting CBD. So, because you get so much less, the price is higher. But, we have extraction equipment, and we have the ability to extract 200 liters of isolate a day, which
Wow.
is 200 kilos of CBD a day.
And because this is brand new to me, and I'm listening to everything you're saying, but can you just rewind a bit and tell us what exactly is so fantastic about CBG, and what is it good for specifically?
Well, CBD is supposedly the best anti-inflammatory in existence.
Right. That we know.
I come from a school, and as do many people that I know, that all disease is one thing only. It's inflammation. Brought about by something or another, but it surfaces as inflammation. Mm-hmm. So we deal with the inflammation. We have a chance of getting at the disease. That's where CBD comes in. CBG is helpful for anxiety, instantly helpful for anxiety, and as is CBD, and addictions. So I'll give you an example. I had a bottle of nanoized CBD So nanoized means the micron is between 35 and 50 microns. When you make CBD that small, the particles that small, you don't need the liver to interpret it to get it to the rest of the body. It is immediately absorbed in the bloodstream, okay? So we were out on the boat one day in Colorado with some friends, and a friend of mine was there, young man in his 30s. He doesn't smoke pot. And the guys on the boat were smoking this vaporizer little machine that they were vaping shatter or some such thing, right? And my friend took a puff of this thing. Well, in about 20 seconds, he was up in the front of the boat in a total panic, hiding, having anxiety,
Wow.
just tremendous. You know, it affected him tremendously. I took my little vial of nanoized CBD out of my pocket, little eyedropper thing, and I put an eyedropper full under his tongue, and in 30 seconds, he was back. Wow. Really, that quickly, he was, okay,
that's amazing.
I'm better. So, you know, there's people end up in emergency rooms in hospitals for marijuana because of one reason only. That's consuming it by eating it, of one, you know, instead of smoking it,
right.
ingesting it in one way or another. The problem with that is the moment that hits your liver, it becomes 4 to 5 times as powerful as smoking it. It converts the THC into THC delta 9 something or
tetrahydrocannabinol.
Something happens with the liver that causes it to be way more potent, way more effective. And so all of the emergency room calls are over this. Our plan is to create this product that'll be in all emergency rooms, in every cop car, in every ambulance, this little product that given instantly will reduce that anxiety and take care of a huge expense that emergency rooms are going through, and they don't know what to do with these people other than give them Valium.
Right. And
right.
it doesn't solve the issue.
Intravenous Valium. That's really good.
Probably get hooked on that and need another drug to help you get off of that hook.
Do you know that more people die kicking Valium than any other drug?
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, that is a fact.
They feel it from overdose. It take a little more.
No. People get hooked on Valium just taking one a day, buddy.
Wow.
Just the withdrawal from it is immense. I have no idea why. But I worked in a drug rehab for a couple of years. Actually, I was working in a drug rehab when the cops showed up and I got indicted. I got 10 years. But that's where I learned that particular
factoid. That's
yeah.
amazing. So you're never going back to prison because you're involved in a legal venture, this hemp industry, but it's really it's amazing, isn't it, how fast people are starting to understand these healthful properties. To me, I need there to be some kind of reckoning for the people who have been so forcefully preventing access to this. I'm very disappointed that in the United States, in various pockets here and there, they have, on Canada's behalf, I'm disappointed that in so many of the American areas, they do have these recompense programs. Like, hey, you went to jail, you did all this, now we're going to bring in the business. They don't even address that here.
My son-in-law in Los Angeles, Anthony Turner, Anthony's involved in social justice and basically Prop 64. What's Prop 64? Prop 64 is a repatriation of people with criminal records to get all of these records expunged. Anthony shows up on weekends in various locations in L.A. with 30, 40 lawyers, and they just see one person after another, hundreds of people every day. They announce that they're coming, and their whole thing is expunging criminal records for people. In Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti, a wonderful guy, he has 2 pet projects. One is called Rebuild LA. LA used to be a manufacturing center. Well, all that manufacturing is gone, but all those empty buildings are there. And the mayor's looking for creative ideas for those buildings. And they will supply the real estate if you come up with the creative idea that they like.
Right.
And then his second pet project is the Reentry Project. And there are 55 to 60,000 people walking the streets of LA with criminal records that can't get jobs. The mayor wants those people to be brought back into society. The ergo, Prop 64, all of the work being done on Prop 64, all of the lawyers showing up to expunge criminal records, that's to help these people get back in.
Right.
And my son-in-law's done a lot of good work in that regard. We're working on a project in LA that is going to benefit those two particular pet projects of the mayor.
Yeah.
We're working on a...
Well, it's refreshing to hear someone at that level of power is wielding it correctly.
And that guy wants to be the next president of the United States.
Wow. What's his name?
Garcetti. Mayor Garcetti.
Because our mayor in Toronto, he's got a bit of an opposite take. What he wants to do instead is he doesn't like all of the circus and the danger that goes on in front of a dispensary when someone goes into it to buy something. So they authorize these police busts that are far more of a scene on the street than someone going into a store. And the other plan, I'm sure that if we had those same buildings here, this mayor would, instead of turning them into projects, would drop them to the floor and put up condos.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do here.
You know, they say we have more cranes in the sky in Toronto than all of North America combined. There are over 168 cranes in the sky here.
Yeah.
And the rest of North America put together doesn't have that many cranes.
Well, maybe the rest of North America doesn't want a phenomenally expensive condo 25 feet away from a major highway that is a big, you know, you're sitting there looking at a parking lot for 4 hours a day because you can't get around this city. Yeah, so just to clarify, if anybody was listening, it was GW Pharmaceuticals with the Epidiolex. This is in England, right? And the purpose of this drug is a what am I saying here? A spasm prevention, an epilepsy drug.
So
an epilepsy drug.
We have Charlotte's Web, and that's been doing that forever.
Is that $33,000 a year?
No, Charlotte's Web is hemp oil basically.
Yeah.
Same as Phoenix Tears, Rick Simpson oil, same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, families are moving to Colorado just to be able to take CBD because it kills those seizures. And so here's this company. It's going to cost you $30,000 a year. Of course, they're a pharmaceutical company. We have, I'm a part of a group that has formulations that have been worked on for the past 50 years that we will be releasing next year. You'll hear a lot about these formulations. I'm not going to tell you what they are right now because I'm bound to secrecy.
Sure.
But, one company recently paid $50 million for the rights to these formulations for a very small area. And we have those for the rest of the world for CBD and CBG and so on. So I'm very excited to tell you that in about a year's time you're going to see a whole lot of new products on the market through these formulations that are not available today.
Great. And that's going to be, you're involved with that greatly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
they will be in
exciting.
all of our white label products, these formulations.
Okay. And you have your son is in America.
I have 4 kids in the U.S.
They're
2
all in the
sons
U.S.?
and 2 daughters.
They're born there? So they're
one son was born here.
Okay.
But he's an American as well.
Okay, so
he lives in Santa Barbara.
Is that a problem for you, having done time in America? And
I have a waiver.
You have a waiver? Ah, I see.
Took a long time to get it, but I finally got it, and now I go back and forth. Every couple of weeks I'm back down there.
And do they look at you strangely? I mean, we're told I can't smoke a joint and cross but you've done time over there. You can cross? Like, what's the condition for the waiver?
Just, I had to fill out this application and, do drug tests and all kinds of stuff. And eventually, after 10 years, they gave it to me. Wow. And so the first 5 waivers I got were for 1 year. And the last waiver I got was for 5 years.
That's a card you flash when you cross over?
It's a letter. It's 2 big sheets of paper I have to give the customs guy, and it's a procedure. It's not, I don't get waved through, let me say that.
And they're not sticky with you, or you don't get waved through. So are they sticky with you in that you're involved with CBDs in
No,
Colombia?
I don't talk about that.
You don't mention,
I got nothing to do. Listen, I go to the United States for one reason only.
To see your children.
See my kids.
Yeah.
That's it.
And was there, it must have been brutal doing this hard time for a long time and not seeing your children. I mean, that's an obvious statement, but can you speak to that at all? I mean, did that change your wiring at all?
It's another part of the price that the government has exacted on people who displease them.
Because I've been hearing a lot about, taking kids away, folks coming in, and everyone's upset that the president would remove, but this has been going on for different reasons forever, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a displaced focus. a PR'd focus. Well, listen, Brian O'Day, this is the worst part of an interview such as this, is that, we have to wrap it up. It's after 4 o'clock.
Oh, my goodness me.
We've had I could go on for another 2 or 3 hours, but we aren't able to do that with the facilities. I'd love to have you back sometime. If you're busy any place in the States, we would happily do a phone call, Skype, if you have any news. If you get the news about the formulations that you're not allowed to share now and you're at the ready stage, we'd love to hear all about it.
I definitely will tell you.
That's amazing.
And, we're doing, we have a line that we're doing specifically for vets called CanOps. And
CanOps.
CanOps.
And tell us about that, because there's such a great support for the vets. We've had the Veterans Channel on. A lot of people are focused on this.
Right. We have a great interest in vets, and
we're talking former military folks, not animal doctors
that are not getting the help that they need. And a lot of them have been finding they get a lot of help from cannabis and from CBD. So we've created a line of CBD products, or in the process of creating a line of CBD products called CanOps that will be aimed directly at the veteran community.
That sounds
and
good.
Reasonably priced for them.
It sounds like the private world is certainly providing far more relief and a landing pad for these folks than the dudes that sent them over there.
Yeah, and we try and make it as inexpensive for the vets as possible, and that's the whole deal.
That's the idea. I'm certainly a fan. I will be reading this. I just came across you a while ago and didn't have time to cram it in, but what an amazing book this is.
Get
by
high.
all reports. Get high
Yeah.
at the bookstore. Are you allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Hey, listen, if you're a cop and you're going to be taking care of people at the side of the road with a Draeger 5000, what you're going to want to do, I think it's necessary that we're going to have to lobby, and we're going to have to try to make sure that you got to do a Draeger test at the beginning of your police constable shift. And since you're out there in the dangerous cannabis during your shift where something might happen to you, I think you're going to need a test at the end of your shift as well. They're $20 each. Every cop before his shift, every cop after his shift. Write your MP. Ask them why it is that there are very good pieces of information and leads that say that Canada has somehow swung a deal with Jamaica to get $100 a pound, and of course they're still going to sell it as high a rate as if they were the black market, while they tried to pretend to squish the black market that they are actually creating for themselves. It's all about perception, folks, and everything's going to be fine.